I didn't expect an apology when I walked into that meeting. I've learned not to expect grace in rooms built on favoritism, but I also didn't expect betrayal to look like a soft smile and a compliment laced with condescension. My manager, Lorraine Calloway, adjusted her designer scarf like we were at brunch and not in the middle of a performance review. "Layla," she began, "you're a force, no doubt about it. But Jenna brings people together. Clients love her energy. She's just more relatable." The words hit like a slap I saw coming, but still wasn't ready for. I kept my expression steady, even as my heart cracked down the center. 6 years of building Meridia Creative's client base from the ground up gone, just like that. All because I didn't giggle in meetings or gossip in the break room. I joined the company at 26, hungry and determined, with a background in digital brand strategy and zero industry connections. I carved out space for myself, with every late night, every client saved, every idea that moved the needle. Now at 32, I'd led 3 of our most profitable campaigns, mentored junior staff who became stars, and never once dropped the ball. But apparently, none of that was enough. Jenna, with her good vibes and perfectly timed flattery, was easier to promote. Lorraine didn't want innovation, she wanted someone who played the game. I nodded slowly as she talked, already knowing this conversation was a turning point, not a defeat, because I had been preparing for this moment longer than anyone realized. What Lorraine didn't know, what no one in that sunlit Manhattan office knew, was that I'd already built my exit plan. While they whispered about office politics, I was designing a consulting firm in the shadows, late-night Zooms with developers, secret coffee shop meetings with venture advisors, all funded with quiet bonuses and freelance side gigs. I wasn't just walking away from Meridia. I was walking into my next chapter fully equipped, fully funded, and 10 steps ahead. Lorraine leaned back in her chair, expecting me to thank her for the feedback. Instead, I pulled out a sealed envelope and slid it across the desk. "What's this?" she asked, brows raised. "My resignation," I said calmly. "Effective 2 weeks from today." For a second, her face didn't register what I'd said. Then the color drained slowly, like coffee soaking into white carpet. "Layla, let's not be hasty," she stammered, but I was already standing. "No worries, Lorraine, you made it clear what you value. I've simply made a different choice." The moment was silent, except for the faint hum of the AC, and the sound of my heels on polished hardwood as I walked out. Outside her office, Jenna caught my eye from her desk, smirking with a mug that read "Boss Babe." She thought she'd won, but she didn't know about the second letter inside that envelope, the one that would shake Lorraine to her core. Because buried under my resignation notice was something far more powerful. My audited results, a detailed systems analysis, and the one signature that would unravel everything they took for granted. And when Lorraine read it, her hands would tremble. She thought she was simply losing an employee, but she was about to lose everything that made her department functional. Lorraine didn't speak to me the rest of the day. I could feel the tension shifting in the air, like the pressure drop before a storm. My resignation letter had passed from her office to HR by lunch, and whispers began crawling across the open floor like spilled ink. Some looked confused, a few looked smug. Jenna, of course, was already holding court by the espresso machine, regaling a junior designer with a story that suspiciously echoed my last pitch presentation. I returned to my desk with precision, powered by something stronger than anger, clarity, the kind you only get when your silence has been misread for weakness for far too long. Everyone thought they knew what I brought to Meridia, but they only saw the surface. Over the next few days, I did what I always did, my job, but this time, I also downloaded and documented every strategy, every metric, every proprietary framework I had authored, not to sabotage, but to preserve the record. Too many people had taken credit for my work over the years. I wasn't going to let them rewrite history just because I was walking away. I'd spent years building an internal tool that tracked creative ROI and optimized campaign rollouts using AI segmentation. Something no one else had noticed was responsible for cutting turnaround time in half. They thought their success was coincidence, but it was architecture. Jenna, now with her new title, strutted past my desk every morning like a peacock in overpriced heels. She started implementing morning team syncs and brainstorming sessions filled with empty platitudes. "Let's make the vibes immaculate today," she chirped one morning, tossing a granola bar onto my desk. I looked up slowly, hiding my smile. "Thanks," I said, sliding it aside as I opened a file on the very system that had been keeping this place from falling apart. She didn't realize yet what she had inherited, a machine with no manual, a plane she didn't know how to fly. Meanwhile, my consulting firm, Leaks Strategies, was ready for launch. The website was live. The first 3 clients, all legacy partners from my Meridia projects, had signed LOIs after hearing I was leaving. One even said, "We only stayed because of you." That's when it hit me. I wasn't a cog in their machine. I was the engine, and they were about to find out what happens when you remove the engine from a moving train. Lorraine still hadn't addressed the second page of my letter. I imagined her skimming over it in haste, only to double back once the numbers caught her eye. By Friday afternoon, I got the email I'd been waiting for. Subject line: Internal Intercent Model. The tone was no longer casual. It was clipped, urgent. "Layla, I reviewed the second part of your resignation. I had no idea. Can we schedule time to discuss?" I didn't reply. I simply marked it unread and went back to finalizing my partnership documents. Because the trap wasn't in what I'd taken with me. It was in what they never bothered to understand while I was right in front of them. And the cracks? They were already starting to show. By the middle of the second week, the mask began to slip. Jenna's motivational quotes and pastel-colored flowcharts weren't holding the team together anymore. Deadlines started slipping. Clients grew impatient. I could hear the tension growing through the walls. Lorraine snapping during calls, junior designers whispering in the copy room, Jenna's voice getting shriller in team meetings. I kept my head down and my calendar open, watching the implosion unfold in slow motion. It was fascinating, like watching someone try to steer a ship with no rudder, no compass, and a hole in the hull. The system I'd built was too complex to replicate through pep talks and Pinterest. Lorraine eventually cornered me outside the elevator, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen her. "Layla, please, we need to talk," she said, her voice tight. "I didn't realize how integrated your tool was in our operations. Can we at least get a walkthrough before your last day?" I paused, studying her. There was panic behind her eyes now, and it wasn't just professional, it was personal. She was realizing that loyalty based on charisma doesn't pay off when systems begin to fail. "Lorraine," I said evenly, "I offered 3 presentations on this model last year. You canceled every one of them." Her face tightened, lips pressed into a line. "I know," she murmured. "I was wrong." Inside, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt detached. Detached from the place I'd once given my whole heart to. Detached from the people who thought leadership meant being liked, not being competent. My future was already unfolding somewhere else. Just that morning, I'd finalized a licensing agreement for my performance system with a boutique agency in Chicago. They were thrilled, already calling it a game changer. And while Meridia flailed, Leaks Strategies was taking flight. The irony wasn't lost on me. They dismissed the architect, and now the walls were collapsing. Jenna was floundering. Her weekly reports were filled with vague metrics and team selfies. One of our key clients, Oakwell Beauty, had emailed asking why their recent engagement stats had dropped to 27%. Jenna forwarded the message to the whole team, asking, "Does anyone know how this happened?" The silence in the office was thunderous. No one answered. No one wanted to. Because the person who had always known was leaving in 3 days. I watched her retreat into Lorraine's office, slamming the door behind her. It was happening faster than I expected. I thought they'd last a month without me. They didn't last a fortnight. That night, I got a text from Michelle, one of the few people at Meridia who had always treated me with respect. "Just so you know, Jenna's crying in the ladies' room. Lorraine's asking IT to pull reports. Nobody knows where anything lives. It's chaos." I smiled, then typed back, "They never bothered to ask while I was still there." The truth was, I didn't want them to suffer. I just wanted them to see what they'd ignored, see the cost of overlooking value, because it didn't come wrapped in charm. But the real lesson wasn't mine to teach anymore. It was one they'd have to learn the hard way. The morning of my final day felt surreal. The office was unusually quiet, not the hum of productivity kind of quiet, but the uneasy stillness of a ship mid-sinking. My inbox was filled with panicked questions from team members who had suddenly realized I was the one holding all the operational strings. I answered what I could with grace, but I didn't overextend myself. They had their chance to learn, to pay attention. Now, it was my time to lead. Lorraine sent a last-minute calendar invite, titled "Final Handoff, Urgent." I declined, because the real handoff had happened 6 months ago when I filed the patent and quietly trademarked the method they depended on without ever noticing. At 10:42 a.m., the internal Slack channel lit up with news. Oakwell Beauty had officially pulled their account. A six-figure contract gone. My phone buzzed immediately. A message from Brent, one of the lead copywriters. You were the glue, Layla. It's falling apart. I stared at the message for a while, not with bitterness, but with the sober awareness of what happens when a company builds its structure on personality, instead of performance. Jenna was nowhere to be seen that morning. I later heard she left the building mid-meeting, face pale, voice trembling, after a client grilled her about KPIs she didn't understand. She hadn't even realized most of those reports had been generated by scripts I wrote myself. Meanwhile, I was headed uptown for a lunch meeting that felt more like a coronation. Lick Strategies had just inked its fourth client, a major wellness conglomerate based in Toronto, and their founder was eager to implement my system across all 5 of their brands. We ate at a rooftop cafe overlooking the Hudson, the kind of place where ideas turn into industry revolutions. As I walked her through the pilot launch, she leaned forward and said, "It's rare to find someone who actually builds the machine, not just runs it. You're a rare breed." I smiled, because for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to fight to be seen, I just had to show up. That afternoon I returned to Meridia one last time to clear my desk. My departure was supposed to be silent, a quiet shuffle out the door. But Lorraine had other plans. She called a team-wide farewell gathering in the break room. Most faces looked unsure, some guilty, others oddly relieved. Lorraine stood beside me, pretending to hold it together. "We wish Layla all the best in her next chapter," she said, her smile brittle. Then she handed me a card, signed by people who'd barely acknowledged my presence over the years. I took it, nodded, and said something brief. I could have scorched the earth with truth. But I didn't, because sometimes silence is more powerful than vengeance. As I turned to leave, I handed Lorraine a plain white folder. "You'll want to read this before your 3 p.m. board meeting," I said. Her eyes narrowed, confused, but I didn't explain. Because the document inside wasn't about bitterness, it was about facts, documented losses, missed adoption metrics, proof of who held the system together, and one final clause, a cease and desist warning for any attempt to recreate my patented process. The signature at the bottom wasn't mine. It was from Lick Strategies' legal counsel. The message was clear. You didn't just lose an employee, you lost the infrastructure. And now, you're on your own. 3 days after my exit, Meridia Creative was trending, but not in the way they hoped. Industry blogs began reporting a sudden internal shakeup following the quiet withdrawal of multiple high-profile clients. One piece in particular caught fire. "Losing Layla, the hidden architect of Meridia's operations, walks away and takes the system with her." My inbox flooded with inquiries. Startups, established firms, even 2 agencies that had turned me down years ago. They all wanted to talk strategy. Meanwhile, Lorraine's world was unraveling in real time. I knew because Michelle, my old teammate, kept me in the loop with quiet, disbelieving messages. "Lorraine's blaming Jenna in meetings now. Jenna's crying again. The board is furious." But what they didn't realize is that it wasn't just about me leaving. It was about what they had built their leadership on. Jenna, for all her charm and curated energy, couldn't manage complexity. She couldn't forecast budgets or break down analytics beyond buzzwords. Without my system streamlining the chaos, departments had started cannibalizing each other. I got word that they'd tried to rebuild a version of my tool from memory using freelancers, but they didn't know what the back end looked like. They didn't understand the principles. They couldn't replicate a framework they never bothered to learn, and each attempt only made things worse. Back at Lick Strategies, things were accelerating. We just landed a feature in Fast Forward, a rising business tech publication. They called my system a bridge between creative innovation and data accountability. It felt surreal reading those words. For years I was the quiet one, the one who did the work while others took credit. Now, my name was the headline. My work was being recognized not because I had finally shouted louder, but because I had built something too solid to be ignored. Recognition wasn't about being liked, it was about being irreplaceable. One morning, while reviewing a new client rollout, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in a while. Lorraine. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another buzz, this time a message. "Layla, I know I mishandled everything. Please. The board wants to speak with you directly. We're open to licensing your system. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened my laptop, pulled up our legal contact list, and forwarded the message to my attorney. I didn't need to call her back, not because I was vengeful, but because I understood something she still didn't. You don't get to erase disrespect with desperation. That evening, over dinner with my co-founder, we toasted to the irony. The same system Lorraine dismissed in a 15-minute meeting was now projected to bring in $500,000 in licensing fees by year's end. Jenna, I heard, had quietly stepped down. Her LinkedIn was suddenly flooded with vague affirmations about growth and humility. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But she had played a game she wasn't built for, and the mask cracked under pressure. Lorraine, on the other hand, had just received her final blow. Because the board hadn't just requested a meeting, they had already voted to remove her. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when the news hit the wire. Meridia Creative announces executive restructure following leadership exit. The article was sharp, but diplomatic. Lorraine resigned. Jenna transitioned out, and the company was now in recovery and reevaluation. Behind the polished phrasing, the truth was obvious. The system had failed without me, and they finally understood why. My name wasn't in the article, but I didn't need it to be. Every leader in the industry who mattered already knew. They weren't just reaching out to congratulate me. They were asking to collaborate, to learn, to license. My exit had created a ripple that turned into a tidal wave, and I had surfed it into a new legacy. That same morning, I walked into the Lick Strategies HQ, our newly leased loft space in Soho, warm light filtering in through tall windows. My team was buzzing with ideas, energized by momentum. I passed framed headlines on the wall, client case studies with dramatic turnaround figures, and a printed copy of the resignation letter that started it all, now marked with a post-it in my own handwriting. Never let them shrink your value to fit their comfort. I took my seat in our weekly innovation lab, surrounded by thinkers, builders, creatives, people who didn't care about office gossip or fake smiles. They respected the work, they respected each other. Mid-meeting, my phone buzzed again. Another email, this time from Phoenix Media Group, one of the most prestigious consulting alliances in the country. Subject, keynote opportunity, the power of walking away. They wanted me to headline their fall conference, to tell my story. I read the message twice, letting the full circle moment land. The girl who was once told she was too focused on results was now being asked to teach the world why results matter. I accepted the offer, not to spite anyone, but because I knew there were thousands of women just like me out there, doing brilliant work in silence, being overlooked for the wrong reasons. I wanted them to know that being passed over doesn't mean you're behind. Sometimes it means you're being free. That weekend, I received a letter in the mail, a real one, on Meridia Creative letterhead. It was signed by the board's new interim chair. It was formal, yet strangely personal. They were offering me the position of Chief Innovation Officer. They promised freedom, full autonomy, equity. It was everything I had once wanted back when I still needed their approval to feel seen. I folded the letter carefully, then dropped it into the shredder without a second thought. My future didn't belong to the place that once underestimated me. It belonged to the company I'd built in its absence, and to the people who saw me before I was a headline. Later that night, I wrote a letter, not for them but for myself. I kept it pinned above my desk. Dear Layla, they will say you're too intense, too serious, too focused. Let them. Because one day, they'll realize that the thing they called too much was exactly what was holding everything together. I smiled as I turned out the lights in my office. The city sparkled below. The storm was over. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. And the world was finally watching me lead. Not because I asked them, but because I earned it.